All right, how's it going, everyone? Gamma Fighter here, coming at you with another Sylvaneth video. This time we're taking a look at some of the pros and cons in Sylvaneth. So, strengths and weaknesses. First, we're going to be looking at what do we have, so you can kind of get a bigger picture of the tools that are available to us. Of course, we can't include every unit in our army, so you're going to have to pick and choose a bit. And sort of seeing everything laid out together really helps me to think about how I want to build armies and just be aware of what options are available to me. And then I also want to take a look at the weaknesses or what we don't have, what we're lacking that some other armies do have that will kind of just help us to know where we fall short and kind of what we can't do, when we're thinking about building our armies. So with that, let's go right ahead. What Sylvaneth have? We have healing. So we heal for D3 with our faction trait. When we're within 6 inches of the awakened Wildwoods. If we go in the Lords of the Clan battle formation, we can heal 3 on our monsters. We can also get +3 rally dice from Revenant Seekers. And that's about it. Alariel has her own healing. She can heal herself for 2d3 in the hero phase, or she can give herself +1 to cast. So that isn't actually a ton of healing. I kind of miss some of the healing options available in third edition, Virtuous Harmony returning models, and the Revenant Seekers used to return a model, not just add to rally dice. So hopefully we do get more healing options in the Battle Tome, maybe like a different spell lore, something like that. But this is a lot more than it used to be in terms of just the automatic healing from our trait. So that's it. That's one of the sort of defining characteristics of the Sylvaneth in fourth edition. We also have 2 teleport abilities, Walk the Hidden Paths. So it's limited. It's only to and from Awakened Wildwoods, and they have to be different ones. You can't teleport within the same Awakened Wildwood. So that's a limitation there. And we also have to be outside of 9 inches from an enemy. And that means that our charges from teleport are going to be really unreliable. So the only charge bonus we have now is +1 to charge from Spite Swarm Hive. So we can get up to an 8-inch charge. And that's if we take the Sylvaneth spell lore, which isn't very good. And so it's just not good enough. We don't have access to a 3d6 charge. So we have to think about these teleport abilities differently. I touched on this in the faction deep dive, but I want to really zero in on this here. Um, I think the best uses are no longer to teleport in and then charge something and kill it. I think the best use for Walk the Hidden Paths where it's going to be for positioning, for setting us up to do tactics on the following turn or to take objectives. I feel like that's probably it's just too risky to try and land a charge. And I just don't really see much other use other than like teleporting something like your Kurnoth hunters with bows into range so that they can shoot. Um, yeah, that seems to be about it. Um, it's a real big change from how Walk the Hidden Pass would work in third edition. And then Strike and Fade. Now it happens after all combat resolves, and you have to still be in combat. But I think a really key difference that players might be overlooking is that it's usable in both players' turn. And so, ironically, Strike and Fade actually might be better to set up charges because you can teleport during your opponent's turn. And as long as they went first, if you're going second, you're guaranteed to be going next in the turn, if they went first. So then that will set you up for a charge because you'll be 9 inches away and then you can move and then you can charge. And if you have Belthanos, you can run and then you can charge. So even if they redeploy, it's very hard for them to get away from you. Um, yeah, which is interesting because Strike and Fade used to be pretty exclusively, for the most part, to fight something and then get back to safety. It was really defensive. I think we really need to flip it around where Walk the Hidden Paths may be more for setting things up, and Strike and Fade is more for setting up aggressive like charges. Something else we have is our Awakened Wildwood, and that's, pretty obvious, but something to consider is that this is an obscuring terrain. As far as I know, I don't think other factions have obscuring terrain that they can set up in the middle of the battle. So I kind of want to just explore and think about what this can give us access to. So, these are the limitations. It has to be wholly within 18 inches of the caster, it has to be outside of 3 inches from terrain, enemy, and objectives. So it's not, you can't just place it anywhere on the board. But the interesting thing is that it is obscuring, it's line of sight blocking, and my understanding of the rule is that it doesn't apply to your units. So you can have a unit of Kurnoth Great Bows inside of the Awakened Wildwood, and they can shoot out of it unimpeded, or even just anywhere behind the Awakened Wildwood. The opponent can't shoot them, and you can shoot at the opponent. We also there may be situations where it's useful to place it down to block movement. And if you know that your opponent is going somewhere on their for their turn, maybe their battle tactic that they chose kind of gives away where they're going to be moving certain units, and maybe it's they're going to have to run or they're going to have to make an important charge to get to that location. It's possible that the Awakened Wildwood could block that movement. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it so far, but something to just keep in mind as a tool in our toolbox. This also, the Awakened Wildwood, as we know, it unlocks spells and abilities and the faction traits and stuff. Really, that's more of a negative. It's not not a good thing necessarily that we have to jump through these hoops to get these effects, and then the effects aren't really appreciably stronger than other factions, what other factions have access to. So um, we also have access to control manipulation. So the Terror in the Eves subfaction, that's not the name of the faction, that's the name of the ability, but you guys get it. So that's -3 control score for enemy units when they're in combat with Sylvaneth. We've got the Draika Rampage, which is on a 2-up, and it can have the opponent's control score for 1 unit. And then the Vengeful Skull Root is -1 control score for every friendly unit that died this battle, and that's for every enemy within the combat range. Again, once within 3 inches of the Vengeful Skull Root. Again, I don't think that makes it worth it to take the Sylvaneth manifestations, but overall, when it comes to control manipulation, I've heard people talk about that they think it will be impactful in this edition. But for me, so far, it seems pretty unclear. I can see how it can be powerful, but it's just so much more powerful just to kill the enemy, and then they have zero control. So my question is, did the game designers intend for us to have this? There's not a ton of it, but are they thinking maybe that this can be a way for us to compensate for how elite our army is? Um, Thinking about I didn't touch on the control score when I did my deep dive. That's how sort of little I think about it and consider it when I'm picking my units and evaluating them. But for example, the Kurnoth Hunters have a control score of a control characteristic of 2. And that means for a unit of 3, their control score is only 6, or for a reinforced unit, their control score is 12. This doesn't feel like the -3 kind of hits any breakpoints or anything like that, because then effectively against one other unit, a reinforced unit of Kurnoth Hunters is going to have an effective control score of 15. I don't think that's really like a breakpoint or anything like that, so not really sure. I was thinking about um, Draika's Rampage. She has a control score of 5, and so she could be used to kind of defend points, and then um, your opponent, if they have a control score of 10, like on a just kind of a basic infantry unit, then they won't be able to take it off of her unless they kill her. Um, that's all I can really think about in terms of like options for like where this would be useful. Or in a reinforced, if she's going up against a reinforced infantry unit, they'll have a control score of 20 that she'll bring down to 5, but maybe if she kills half of them, I don't really know actually. I'm again, it's unclear to me. All right, so what else do we have? We actually have access to quite a lot of mortal damage. It's not the same like raw power of mortal damage. It's definitely chip damage. A lot of it is roll a d3, and on a 2-up you deal that much mortal damage. So it's nothing like in third edition, but overall, it feels like other factions have had mortal damage like mostly removed, and by comparison, it feels like again, I'm not so intimately familiar with every faction in the game, but it feels like we have a lot that's still available to us, even though it is just chip damage. So we have some impact hits. The Kurnoth Hunters with swords, when they charge, they deal impact hits. And then when the Kurnoth Hunters with size get charged, they deal impact hits back, some reverse impact hits. We've got Alariel and Belthanos have their own version of impact hits. Belthanos is like a rampage and he can kind of move around and stuff, but it's pretty much the same. We still have a couple of spells. There's that lore spell. That's available to us. Alariel has a 2d3 mortal damage spell, which is pretty good. It's the most unrestricted because the other ones really rely on the enemy being near awakened wildwoods. I think the lore spell has like with the enemy has to be within 12 inches or within a certain range of the awakened wildwood, something like that. But Alariel's is just, I think, just within 12 inches of her. The Warsong Revenant, of course, had a great mortal damage spell in third edition, but it's not terrible now, but it's definitely not as strong as it was before. I consider it more of chip damage kind of thing. We have some from our faction traits. The Greenwood Gladius artifact can deal the mortal damage to enemies in combat. The Awakened Wildwoods on a 4-up, they'll do D3 mortal damage to all the enemy units that are within combat range. But most of the time, I don't think the enemies are going to have a bunch of units in combat range unless they are killing it. So, although I think the Awakened Wildwood ability goes off before combat, so that it would still be able to do that chip damage. And then miscellaneous, the Tree Lord Ancient. It's not like a spell, it's just like an ability. So I just put it there. And it's similar to the Awakened Wildwood's own mortal damage. So there's quite a lot of different sources, and it's sort of like no matter which kind of direction you go with the army, you have pretty easy access to at least a little bit. The Greenwood Gladius is kind of we don't have like super good artifacts to pick from, so if you don't have access to like chip damage from other sources, the Greenwood Gladius can just be that source for you. We also have quite a lot of crit mortals. Well, not a ton, but enough that I think it's worth mentioning. The Kurnoth swords, of course, they're devastating damage because they have those impact hits and then they have crit mortals on their swords, which are quite good. So they end up just doing buckets of damage. The Spite Revenants also have crit mortals, and that's their main source of damage too. They're a much weaker unit though, so even reinforced, they're not doing a ton of damage, but we did a deep dive on the damage numbers earlier, so you can check that video out if you want to see more on that. And then the Revenant Seekers, the Riders have crit mortals as well, and that's just, I think, a little bit of a bonus. They're not as good of a damage unit as the Spite Rider Lancers, but the crit mortals let them have reliable damage, and especially against like really tough armor things, they can get a little damage through. I also have a second kind of line because these ones aren't quite as reliable. The Tree Lord variants have an attack profile that has like 2 attacks, and then it has crit mortals. And so it's a bonus when you do roll the 6s to hit. But they wound on 2s and they have like good rend. So it's not that big of a deal, but sometimes it's gonna help. Plus, just the fact that you're only rolling 2 dice, the odds of getting a 6 is pretty low. So it's not super reliable, but it's a nice little bonus. And then the Lady of Vines, she has, I think, yeah, she has 6. Her melee profile is 6 attacks, and they have crit mortals, and they have actually the same profile as the Kurnoth swords. It's like hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s. And then she has 2 rend, while the Kurnoth swords have 1 rend, and then 2 damage. So she's kind of like a really buff Kurnoth hunter with a great sword, which I think is actually kind of cool. But since she's just one unit, she's got 6 attack, or so she's just one model in the unit. It's just going to be 6 attacks. On average, you're getting 1 crit mortal, so it's just chip damage, just chipping away. All right, speaking of mortal damage, here's the Warsong Revenant again. What we do have is access to wards. Of course, the Lady of Vines has the 5-up ward aura, which is on a spell. The Warsong Revenant has a 6-up ward aura for 12 inches, which is just automatic, which is beautiful. I keep forgetting to mention this, but the Warsong Revenant also reduces the ward of enemies by 1, which is really, really big because it feels like there's a lot weaker wards now, and we're seeing a lot more of the 6-ups. And so you can just take that away. And even when you see someone with a 5-up ward, having the Warsong Revenant in range to be able to reduce that, it's a 12-inch range, by the way, to be able to reduce their ward, that's having the effectiveness, which is really great. The Kurnoth Hunters, they have a 6-up ward when you're standing on objectives. The Spite Swarm Hive, as mentioned earlier, it can give +1 charge to an ally unit, but the other option is that it can give a 6-up ward. So, you know, it's on a 2-up. You have to summon the thing. That is not worth it. Not worth it. And then there's a couple of native wards. The Warsong Revenant has a ward on the War Scroll just for itself. Although I think it would also have access to its own 6-up ward aura, even if it wasn't printed on the War Scroll for an extra, the 6-up ward as well. And then Alariel has a ward. So we don't have a ton of units that have native wards, but we have a couple of different options. And I think this is important too. Just like with the chip damage, it's not like incredible. It's not like every unit in our faction has a built-in 5-up ward save or something like that. But we just have a bunch of different ways that we can get access to it. And that really tells me that I think that game designers want us to make use of it. And no matter how you build your army, it's pretty easy to fit one of these in. Notably, the Kurnoth Hunters are a really great offensive unit. And the fact that they can also give this pretty powerful defensive buff is really cool. Okay, what else do we have? We have recursion. So now we're getting into the things that are really tied to just one unit. I don't have a ton of these, but I think these are powerful enough that I think they do sort of define the faction, even though they are just locked to one unit. The way I think of it is that some of these centerpieces, it's definitely true for Sylvaneth, and I've seen it in other factions as well. But some of these big centerpiece models, they're sort of like a sub-faction kind of thing in and of themselves. Like it's such a strong and defining ability that it's just that you have to unlock it just only by using that one unit. So yeah, so it's locked to one hero. I acknowledge that. And it's in your movement phase on a 3-up, and the unit comes back at half strength. And so just to break down the numbers, you're probably only going to get 4 attempts at this per game, maybe 5 sometimes, but it's going to be pretty rare that you're going to have something die turn 1 before you've even taken your first turn. And then, yeah, sometimes it's going to be 3, but out of 4 attempts on a 3-up, you're expecting 2 or 3 successes, I think leaning towards 3 a little bit. So it's actually not that great when you compare it to other recursion that other classes have, or sorry, other factions have available to them. But the good thing is that we can bring back some really high quality units. So if we have a reinforced unit of Kurnoth great swords, then we're bringing back 220 points when we do that. So then Spite Rider Lancers, if we have a reinforced unit, we're bringing back 210 points worth of units there, which is pretty strong. And even looking at Spirit of Durthu, he'll come back with 8 damage taken, but it's 330 points that you're bringing back, which is pretty sick. Belthanos is also 330, although he'll also have 8 damage taken, and Alariel can bring herself back. So this is something like you probably want to do. You don't want her to die, but if she does, then you can bring her back, and she'll also have 8 damage taken. But then you're bringing back 680 points. You have a 66% chance of it happening. If it's going to happen, hey, maybe you wait until the end so that you can, if she doesn't come back, then she wasn't dead for half the game. But yeah, so again, in terms of overall recursion that other factions have available, it's not that great, but look at the power that we can bring back. Potentially, bringing back like 1,000 points per game. Uh, like if you bring back Alario, there's a pretty good chance you'll bring back over 1,000 points per game, which is pretty strong. Okay, although, of course, acknowledge the points cost, like her points cost is inflated because of that ability. So, All right, so next, we also have access to run and charge, and that's once again locked to one hero, Belthanos. And this is really strong because this enables battle tactics. So if you watch my battle tactics video, you know how powerful Belthanos is in an army. There's stuff like slaying targets, so you have to get to the right target. There's stuff like taking objectives, so you have to make that charge, stuff like that. And Belthanos' run and charge is going to score you points if you bring him. So that's really powerful. This means not just in terms of victory points, but in terms of power of the army. That means we have more mobility. We can choose our targets more carefully, and we overall every unit has a bigger threat range, which is it's really powerful. Yeah. Okay, the last thing that we have that's locked to a unit is the ability to shoot heroes. And of course, that's just on the Kurnoth Great Bows, but they can totally ignore the guarded hero. That means that they can shoot heroes, foot heroes that are with infantry units from outside of 12 inches, and they don't have a penalty to hit when they do that. That's pretty strong. They natively have anti-hero +1 rend, which is good. It'd be really, in case you didn't know that GW wants us to target heroes with these guys, now you know. And then, yeah, in this GHB, we have the Honor Guard rule, which can give us priority target, and Kurnoth bows can have their ranged attacks being +1 to hit and +1 to wound. That's pretty good. The priority target rule does not specify that it's for combat attacks, and from my understanding, this is what GW intended. But that means that the Kurnoth Hunters, they only have 2 shots each, so it's not a huge volume, but they're hitting on 2s and they're wounding on 2s. They have, against heroes, they have 2 rend and 2 damage. So that's a pretty big threat. You bring a reinforced block. Like, that's a good reason to bring a reinforced block in your general's regiment. I think it's really strong for this whole year because of the rule in the GHB. But I think even without the +1 to hit and +1 to wound, I think the Kurnoth Hunters will be like the Great Bow and the ability to target heroes and everything will be pretty good. It's putting out pretty solid numbers, pretty, really accurate stuff with high rend against heroes. So even when you're not going like targeting a foot hero, some of these monstrous heroes and stuff like that, it's pretty significant damage. You might not be able to wipe out, a mega boss on Maw Crusher in one shot, but like you're working them, man. All right, what else do we have? We have mobility and not just the teleporting. We do have a couple of options. The Bug Riders, Revenant Seekers, and Spite Rider Lancers are fast hammers. Particularly, the Spite Rider Lancers are more of the hammers, but the Tree Revenants can teleport. It's pretty much unrestricted. You just have to be away from enemy units, and you want the Tree Revenants away from enemy units anyways. The Gaussmid Archers have pretty good mobility, and they can pair that with shooting to be really annoying. And so they can do some chip damage, and they can cap objectives, and can complete battle tactics. So yeah, we do have teleports too, but like we discussed, they're more limited now than in 3rd edition, and therefore they're less reliable. Okay, something else that I think is important. We have a couple of ways to manipulate hit and wound rolls. I think that these bonuses are pretty common. It's sort of like the easiest knob for GW to tweak is like giving stuff like, oh, +1 to hit or whatever as a bonus, but we also have access to penalize the opponent's hit and wound rolls, which I think is a bit more rare. So I'm going to put them both together here as like sort of ways that we manipulate hit and wound rolls. So the Lady Vines, her rampage can give +1 to hit to allies against an enemy unit that she's in combat with. Drika has a spell that can only target enemy infantry units, but then any allies that target that enemy unit with combat attacks, they get +1 to hit. The Arch Revenant has a aura that gives +1 to wound to Kurnoth hunters within 12 inches of her. And then we have the artifact, the Crown of Fellbowers. It's goes on a hero, and then you pick an enemy that they're in combat with, and then friendly Sylvaneth units have +1 to wound against that target. And then Durthu gives himself +1 to hit when an enemy is near an awakened Wildwood. That's actually, it's not going to be super common for an opponent to be in combat range of an awakened Wildwood, but when they are, like going from a 4-up, oh no, he starts at a 3-up to hit. So he's hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s. Dang, Durthu. I really like Durthu, guys. He's really awesome. Even if you don't count that bonus, like he's pretty baller. Okay, we have penalties to hit and wound. So the Dryads, very famously, when they're within 6 inches of an awakened Wildwood, they are -1 to hit and -1 to wound, which is really powerful. Turns them from a trash little fodder mob to something like a real tar pit. The Tree Lord also has a rampage to on a 3-up, you reduce the enemy's wound score by 1, or their wound roll by 1. And then the Lady of Vines has a rampage that on a 2-up, then the enemy unit has a -1 to hit as well. So yeah, I didn't say any more on that. I've talked about this in the numbers when we looked at just the damage and durability, and I think that this is one of the sneakiest, like most powerful tricks that we have. I have heard people talk about like going up against like that 2-hit rolls are like pretty high in this edition. Like they're not as strong as they used to be. Like stuff used to be hitting on 3s like all the time, but a lot of stuff's hitting on 4s now. And so I've heard people complain that when they go up against like Lumineth Realm Lords, it's like really tough because they're hitting on like 4s or they're hitting on 5s, and it's just like they just need so much volume to get any damage through. I think this is going to be a good strength of ours, and especially when you pair it with stuff like the wards. So, all right, so here's what we don't have. All right. We don't have spells that heal. I talked about Virtuous Harmony. We used to be able to bring models back to a unit with that spell. We used to just have like a flat healing spell. We had our Throne of Vines in 3rd edition would heal for 1 at the end of every phase, which was like just this healing over time, which like on a Lariel in this edition would just be crazy. She would just never, you'd have to kill her in 1 hit, or she's just back to full like instantly, man. So yeah, some factions do. I think overall we have a lot more passive healing, but you know, we also, I mentioned before, we don't have access to a 3d6 charge. So it's I think I wonder if like GW just thinks that giving us too much bonus to charge just makes Walk the Hidden Paths like way too strong, and so they're intentionally not giving it to us, or if they're like for the index, they're sort of restricting us and trying to teach us and force us to play a different way, and then they might unlock it in like a subfaction or more likely maybe a spell lore that can give us better charges, and then we'll have more options in the battle tome. I'm wondering if that's true. It feels like they more want us to not be able to have these great teleports from Walk the Hidden Path, or sorry, these great charges from Walk the Hidden Paths, but something just to think about. We also don't have access to like subtracting a die from the enemy's charge, like some factions have access to. The Twist Wield can subtract D3 from an enemy's charge, but it's pretty limited. You kind of have to jump through some hoops to make it happen. Some factions just have like, hey, remove 1 charge die from the enemy, and it just like paralyzes the enemy. So Uh, we don't have a ton of strike first or strike last. To just go over it again, the Tree Lord Ancient has a strike last rampage. It's on a 4-up. And then the Branch Witch can give an allied unit strike first when they're charged during the opponent's charge phase. And then the Spite Rider Lancers have a 3-up strike first when they charge. But that's about it. It seems like there's not a ton of this going around anymore. And it's true for us as well. We've just really got the one Spite Rider Lancer that's like really well, I was gonna say reliably. A 3-up is not super reliable, but going to be able to have easy access to it. I also feel like we don't have a ton of combos. I did talk about a couple of like combination things here, and we have the obvious one where Drika's buff spell, like that gives +1 to hit. It also gives +1 to wound for Spite Revenant and Twist Wield. That's like an obvious combo. The Arch Revenant gives a bonus to Kurnoth Hunters that are within 12 inches of her. That's a obvious combo, but what I mean though is things that are just like multiplicatively stronger, not because it says like on the Arch Revenant War Scroll, it says the word Kurnoth Hunter. So it goes with the Kurnoth Hunter. I just mean like stuff that's really synergistic that takes like it takes us to like the next level to where we're really like destroying things because there's still some combos in other factions that are just really, really powerful. Something else we don't have is efficient damage and durability. I looked at our damage and durability within the Sylvaneth faction in another video, but I really want to do a video comparing us to other factions, like their elite units, their cavalry, there's elite infantry like our Kurnoth Hunters, and it's really hard to do a comparison like that because it's hard to take into account what like spells and stuff that the other factions have access to. But I am curious to take a look at that and just see on paper, like just what it says on the War Scroll, like how do we compare? I would imagine that our top damage in the Crown of Swords is not going to be the same as other top damage in other factions. I think there's going to be some factions that have stronger damage, and I think there's going to be other factions that have stronger, like more durable units. I think they're trying to make for example, with the Kurnoth Hunters, I think they're trying to make them a balance between durability and damage, and like by giving all of our units like pretty considerable durability, it sort of puts us like halfway. Whereas like some factions will have these really glass cannons where they can do much more spiky damage. But the unit's really fragile, and I think those are probably better. And we really need to consider like if that's the case, it's going to affect how we should be playing the game. That's one of the reasons I value efficiency really a lot in the army is because our troops are so elite. We don't have a lot of room for a bunch of units to kind of fill roles. So like if you take Alariel, that's over a quarter of your list that's in this really inefficient damage. And I feel like we need the most efficient damage possible paired with her to sort of make up for the lack of damage that she's bringing in terms of efficiency, if that makes sense. Anyways, that was kind of a long time to talk on that. We don't have access to fight twice. So not every faction can have a Varying Guard, which is just like, a super strong unit that's super fast and can fight twice and has crit mortals. But yeah, I just thinking about that. Also notably, what we have quite a bit of access um, to manipulate hit rolls and wound rolls, but we don't have anything now, I always say, whenever I say something like that's absolute, I always like second guess myself. But as far as I know, we don't have any access to anything that's increases the attack characteristic or the damage characteristic. The only thing that can increase the damage characteristic that I remember is the bug riders when they charge, they do +1 damage. But other than that, there's no like spell or like when a unit is within 12 inches of this hero, they get +1 to damage or something like that. All right, so that's it. Thank you for watching. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment with your thoughts, especially if there's anything that I missed or if just looking at this made you think of, sort of like have a revelation about like how you're going to build a list or um, how you think we should be playing our army, let me know. And if there's anything you want to see next from me, I'm really focusing on the Sylvaneth right now. I only have a couple factions that I'm super interested in. And Sylvaneth is by far my favorite. So, but if you have any video ideas for me, please let me know. I do have a bunch of ideas too, but I want to make sure I'm putting out stuff that you guys are interested in as well. But that's it for me. Really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thanks.